Amidst expensive suits and cold handshakes, she entered like an unfamiliar breeze, a simple woman without titles or glamour. Giggles rang out. Contemptuous glances flickered past, yet no one knew that right here, Eveline Hart would soon silence them all and make them bow their heads. And when she faced the most challenging trial of her life, no one expected that the woman in worn canvas shoes would become the one to change everything. A math problem, but not just arithmetic. An entire world would be overturned. In an instant, arrogance would pay a price. Truth cannot remain hidden forever. But would Eveline possess enough strength to expose everything? Stay until the end, for her story is not merely a confrontation. It is a lesson the world will never forget. That October morning, gentle sunlight spilled over the ancient courtyard of St. Lennox University, casting a pale golden hue on ivy-covered brick walls. Autumn leaves rustled beneath the feet of scholars clad in impeccably tailored suits, carrying leather briefcases, their name tags gleaming proudly on their chests. Among this crowd, Eveline Hart appeared, a faded streak amidst the vibrant scene. She wore a cardigan frayed at the sleeves, faded jeans, and old canvas shoes with worn heels. Her chestnut hair was loosely tied back with a thin elastic band, stray strands fluttering in the breeze. In her hands, she clutched a thick notebook, its leather cover creased from years of use. She slowly stepped into the grand lobby, the gathering place of the world's most brilliant minds. Crystal chandeliers glittered like stars trapped on the ceiling. Cold marble walls reflected pale, shimmering lights. The air was thick with expensive perfume, fresh leather, and an arrogant self-assurance. From her first steps, Eveline felt all eyes turned toward her. Cold stares, scrutinizing looks, contemptuous glances. A middle-aged man wearing a pinstriped suit and neatly knotted Hermes tie shook his head slightly, whispering to a colleague. Perhaps she got lost. This isn't a PTA meeting nearby. A group of 32 men and a woman stood near the entrance, giggling behind their hands, and pointing at Eveline's canvas shoes. She felt everything, every glance, every murmur of laughter, every gesture dripping with disdain. But Eveline did not falter. She kept her back straight, chin raised, eyes calmly sweeping the vast hall where esteemed scholars gathered around research displays, LED screens showcasing complex graphs. She knew exactly where she was, and she knew exactly why she was here. From a distance, a receptionist dressed in deep blue velvet hurried towards her, offering a forced smile that poorly concealed her discomfort. "Excuse me, miss," she whispered politely yet pointedly. "This area is reserved for official guests. Would you like me to direct you to the cafe outside?" Eveline merely shook her head gently, her eyes shining with an unyielding determination. She continued forward, heading deeper into the heart of the Ascension Forum, a place where anyone lacking an illustrious academic title would immediately be considered an outsider. Amidst rising whispers, a small storm of prejudice was forming, but Eveline, with her worn cardigan and old notebook, quietly passed through it like a calm arrow piercing the luxurious facade of false intellectualism. She required no one's permission. She sought no acceptance, because she hadn't come to beg for a place. She had come to write a story this world would never forget. The atmosphere in the hall abruptly thickened as Eveline Hart moved deeper inside. The polished shoes of scholars clacked softly against marble floors, but everything seemed to freeze as her threadbare sweater and worn canvas shoes passed by. Side glances turned into open whispers. Look, she must have mistaken the hall. She probably came for a service job. Not every corner of this university is open to everyone. Amid these poisonous murmurs, the distinct click of high heels resonated decisively on the floor. Madeline Rhodes, a rising star in combinatorial research, and a prestigious doctoral candidate at St. Lennox, appeared with the poise of an arrogant swan. She wore a sleek black Chanel dress, her blonde hair tied neatly into a high ponytail. Her perfectly made-up face carried a cold, extended smile. Madeline stepped directly in front of Eveline, openly expressing disdain in her eyes. "Excuse me, miss." Madeline raised her voice, just enough for others to overhear. "This area is exclusively for invited speakers and scholars. The cafe for visitors is downstairs, Soft laughter instantly erupted throughout the auditorium, spreading from the group of students to the professors standing nearby. A few people even nudged each other, whispering cruel remarks. Eveline stood still, her face betraying no emotion. She knew that if she spoke now, she'd only provide more amusement to the crowd eager to find a victim to mock. Instead, she quietly clutched her old notebook tightly to her chest, her hazel eyes reflecting a silent yet unyielding determination. Madeline didn't stop. As if sensing blood in the air, she took another step forward, nearly blocking Eveline's path. "If you're looking for an internship opportunity," Madeline said, her voice as cold as a blade, "perhaps you should start at the freshman job fairs." Another burst of laughter echoed, harsher and more malicious. Eveline shifted slightly to the side, avoiding Madeline's blockade, but each step felt like moving through an icy wall erected by prejudice and arrogance. From the main podium, where the greatest names in mathematics were gathered, a few glances turned downward, not in defense, just to watch, like observing a withered leaf fall, insignificant, harmless. A security officer dressed in a black velvet vest approached Eveline, his smile polite, but his eyes revealed impatience. "Miss, may I see your invitation?" he asked, overly courteous. Eveline gently produced a sapphire-colored card, a guest of honor invitation, and handed it to him. The officer paused, his face stiffening. He carefully inspected the invitation, then reluctantly nodded, having no grounds to escort Eveline out. Yet this event, rather than shaming the crowd, only intensified their concealed resentment toward her. In their eyes, Eveline had disrupted the unspoken order of a meticulously tailored world reserved exclusively for the worthy, and the real storm had only just begun. The already oppressive air in the auditorium now shifted into something harsher, raw envy. The scattered laughter turned into malicious whispers, needle-sharp, permeating the heavy air. Madeline Rhodes, still arrogantly self-assured, seized the opportunity to make Eveline's situation even more difficult. She pivoted, striding confidently toward the whiteboard at center stage, previously used by speakers to display formulas and proofs. Madeline's high heels clicked rhythmically on the wooden floor, drawing every eye in the hall with each of her movements. "We're here to celebrate intellect," Madeline declared, turning back to face Eveline. Her voice echoed through the microphone, steel cold. "So, if you truly believe you belong here, why don't you show us your real capabilities?" Without waiting for a response, Madeline grabbed a marker and quickly scrawled complex mathematical symbols across the whiteboard, a sophisticated combinatorial problem, a domain only the most exceptional experts would dare approach. Interwoven expressions, intricate transformations, and complex permutations formed a terrifying labyrinth on the board. A few in the audience softly whistled, others giggled, even applauded mockingly. Madeline stepped back half a pace, waving toward Eveline as if she were a queen beckoning a servant to an impossible task. "If you can solve this problem before the break ends," Madeline said, her mouth twisting into a half-smile, "I'll publicly apologize and treat you to coffee for an entire week." She paused briefly, her voice sharpening. "If not, please step aside for genuine researchers." The auditorium erupted in overlapping laughter, echoing beneath the vaulted ceilings. Eveline stood there, her hand still clutching the worn notebook tightly against her chest. In the dazzling glow reflected from the sapphire badges, she appeared small, but her eyes did not. Her gaze remained composed, like an unruffled lake beneath an exploding sky. Those around Eveline whispered, secretly betting she'd flee or bow her head in humiliation. No one, not even Madeline, truly believed Eveline could succeed. To them, it was merely a minor drama to politely finish their civilized public shaming under the guise of a fair challenge. A public stab in broad daylight. The entire auditorium seemed to freeze, holding its breath, waiting for Eveline to stiffen, stumble, and fail. The marker lay ready in the tray. The whiteboard waited, and history was about to be rewritten, but not in the way they imagined. Eveline tightened her grip on the notebook strap slightly, a peculiar glint lighting up her hazel eyes. She slowly walked toward the whiteboard, each step silently striking the arrogance suspended in the air. As Eveline approached the whiteboard, the auditorium seemed to solidify, Hundreds of eyes filled with skepticism, mockery, and an eagerness to witness failure collectively followed her every step. The earlier whispers and laughter had vanished entirely, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. Crystal glasses hovered in midair. Sapphire jewels on name tags glittered beneath chandeliers, reflecting tense anticipation in the grand room. Eveline reached the enormous whiteboard, the marker lying still in the tray as a silent challenge. She lifted her hand, lightly touching the elastic band, holding her hair, a subtle gesture, reminding herself to maintain composure amidst the overwhelming pressure. At that very moment, a whisper drifted from behind. "Look at her trembling. She'll probably just stand there until the break ends." What a farce! A mocking smile briefly flashed across Madeline's face as she folded her arms, a triumphant gleam in her eyes, certain of victory. Across the hall, a group of seasoned professors exchanged quick glances, partly curious, partly pitying. Pressure weighed heavily upon Eveline, like a giant rock. She could feel every gaze piercing through her worn-out cardigan. She could hear the heartbeat of the crowd, each pulse a silent lash urging her to fail. She could smell the ambition and arrogance, thick and heavy as an invisible wall erected around her. But Eveline didn't tremble. She didn't retreat. She took a deep breath, allowing the cool air to fill her lungs, easing every tense muscle. Then, slowly, she bent down, picking up the marker from the tray. The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath. A slight frown crossed Eveline's face, not from fear, but absolute concentration. The crowd began murmuring, "Does she really think she can do it? How absurd." An elderly scholar, Professor Leonard Marshall from Harvard, sat with crossed arms, shaking his head and whispering, "No one but the advisory board could solve that under such pressure." In the honored seats, Daniel, Hard Eveline's husband, sat silently, his hands clasped together, eyes never leaving the petite figure in front of the whiteboard. He didn't speak, he didn't intervene, because he knew better than anyone. Eveline's strength was not in diplomas or titles. It was in her unconquerable stillness. Amidst the roaring storm of pressure, Eveline stood firm like a small candle that never flickers out in a fierce gale. And then the marker touched the whiteboard. The first stroke, firm, decisive. The auditorium held its breath. The chandelier faintly trembled in the draft, as if the wall of arrogance itself was quietly cracking. The real game was just beginning. The tip of Eveline's marker glided across the whiteboard, drawing the first lines in the suffocating atmosphere. Not a single laugh, not a whisper. The spacious auditorium now echoed only with the dry sound of the marker, resonating between marble walls and shimmering chandeliers. Eveline didn't rush. Each symbol she wrote flowed smoothly, neatly, naturally, as if they'd long existed clearly in her mind. A series of permutations appeared. A complex combinational transformation was elegantly reversed and simplified. Each variable was methodically reorganized with rare finesse. Some in the audience began to straighten in their seats, squinting at the board. Experienced professors exchanged cautious glances, unease starting to creep among the crowd. Madeline Rhodes, standing at the edge of the platform, her mocking smile slowly stiffened. She watched intently the symbols Eveline was drawing and realized, in a startling moment, she didn't fully understand what was unfolding on the board. Eveline continued. No erasing, no hesitation, no pause for thought. It was as though the entire solution had been fully formed in her mind, merely awaiting its unveiling on this whiteboard. 3 minutes passed. Only 3 minutes. The whiteboard was now transformed into a complex yet entirely coherent picture, a supersymmetric system, simplifying the combinational problem to an optimal level no one in the auditorium had ever imagined. Eveline gently placed the marker back into its tray. She turned around quietly, returning to her original spot, her worn canvas shoes making gentle scraping sounds against the wooden floor. In a stunned silence, the auditorium was quiet enough to hear the turning of a page. In a distant corner, no one dared to breathe loudly. In that silence, the scraping of a chair echoed. Professor Harold Fenwick, a towering figure in the field of combinational mathematics, slowly rose from the first row. He calmly stepped onto the stage, auditorium lights reflecting off his metal-rimmed glasses. Every gaze followed him. Fenwick approached the whiteboard closely, scanning the lines of symbols. Initially, his face was expressionless, as though assessing a mundane exercise, but within seconds, his demeanor shifted. He leaned in closer, more intently, lips pressed tightly together, a sharp intake of breath. Then he turned around, facing the auditorium, eyes narrowed, his voice deep and filled with emotion. "This," he paused, ensuring he was not mistaken, "is the shortest, most precise solution I've ever seen for this problem." A wave of astonishment swept through the crowd. Sapphire name badges swung wildly, with startled head turns. The gleaming cufflinks suddenly lost their arrogance. Fenwick continued, his voice now admiring. "She employed a second-level supersymmetric model to simplify the problem, a technique not yet fully proven by the current advisory board." A wave of astonished whispers exploded like spreading fire. Even the most renowned professors in the auditorium were stunned. Eveline stood motionless at the front, her chestnut brown eyes calm, neither smiling nor showing any sign of arrogance. For her, victory was not something to celebrate. Victory was simply proof of the truth. And today, that truth was undeniable. Amidst the rising murmurs in the hall, Eveline Hart remained silent, her chestnut brown eyes revealing nothing but absolute composure. At the head of the hall, reserved for keynote speakers, Daniel Hart, a man with lightly silver-streaked hair in a simple gray suit, slowly rose. Without needing a microphone or signaling, Daniel's mere presence instantly silenced the noise around him, as though an invisible wave was forcing the entire room into quietness. He walked steadily onto the stage, his steel-colored eyes locked firmly onto the crowd. When Daniel Hart, a recipient of the Fields Medal, the highest honor in mathematics, began to speak, everyone stopped to listen. He picked up the microphone, his deep, resonant voice sharp yet warm. "I think it's time you all knew," he began, his eyes glinting sternly, "about the woman who just solved the problem the advisory committee couldn't." A heavy silence descended. "This is Eveline Hart," Daniel said, gently gesturing towards the woman in the worn sweater, standing quietly like a pillar amidst a sea of people. "She is the person who turned down 3 doctoral positions at Harvard, MIT, and Princeton, 3 of the most prestigious invitations anyone in this room could dream of." A ripple of shock passed through the hall. Stunned eyes turned back towards Eveline. Daniel continued, his voice steady yet emotional. "While many here spend their entire lives seeking recognition, Eveline chose a quieter path, staying home to care for her sick mother instead of chasing fame. But that choice didn't diminish her talent. Instead, it honed her mind to a sharpness very few can reach." He paused briefly, allowing his words to sink deeply into the minds of those listening. 80% of the research for which I was recognized," Daniel spoke slowly, his gaze sweeping over the astonished faces, "was based on formulas, ideas, and models Eveline created quietly, unnoticed. While caring for her mother, the hall seemed frozen. Madeline Rhodes, who had been arrogantly laughing earlier, stood rigid, her face pale as paper. The whispered conversations died out, replaced by a stifling silence. A silence thick with shame no one dared articulate. Daniel lowered the microphone and stepped aside, allowing the auditorium lights to shine fully upon Eveline. She needed no titles. She needed no glittering degrees. She needed no PR team to construct her image. With only an old notebook, a brilliant mind, and an unwavering heart, Eveline had quietly reached heights many would never touch in their lifetime. At that moment, the entire Ascension Forum auditorium held its breath, not out of fear or mere admiration, but because they knew they had just witnessed true genius. Immediately after Daniel Hart finished speaking, the Ascension Auditorium fell into an unprecedentedly heavy silence. The tailored suits, the sparkling sapphire name tags, the premium Italian silk ties, all symbols of power, suddenly seemed empty and meaningless against the unveiled truth. Madeline Rhodes stood paralyzed on stage, her face drained of color. Her expensive Chanel dress could no longer conceal the burning shame beneath her skin. Around her, those who had joined in mocking Eveline lowered their eyes, avoiding each other's gazes like guilty children. The earlier whispers vanished as if swept away by a chilling wind. In a corner, Clara Weston, the senior coordinator who had tacitly allowed Eveline's humiliation, swallowed hard. When Daniel's eyes swept past her, Clara quickly lowered her head, her shoulders trembling slightly as though under an invisible verdict. The silence became so suffocating that even the turning of notebook pages and the gentle clink of glasses resonated clearly. Then, as if an irreversible chain reaction had begun, the consequences started to unfold. First, Madeline Rhodes. The organizers swiftly received instructions from the advisory board. Her research scholarship was suspended, all financial support withdrawn, and she was barred from high-level conferences for 3 years. Clara Weston did not escape either. That same afternoon, she was officially informed of her transfer to the administrative department, a silent but devastating demotion. Professors who had supported or tolerated Eveline's humiliation faced renewed scrutiny of their funding. Several research records underwent rigorous review. Some conference invitations were rescinded. Even prominent figures were forced to abandon ongoing projects due to tarnished reputations. The shockwave Eveline unintentionally created didn't just topple individuals, it fractured the quietly resilient power structure of the Ascension Forum's academic community. Meanwhile, Eveline, the center of all attention, the origin of the tsunami washing away arrogance, stood there, quietly and firmly. No celebrations, no triumph, only tranquility and gentle light in her chestnut brown eyes, calm as a lake after a stormy night. The audience, once indifferent or complicit, began standing one by one. No one gave a signal, no one initiated. Driven solely by the weight of truth, the entire auditorium silently rose to their feet, forming a motionless forest, a wordless ceremony of respect. The first applause rang out, deep and decisive. Then a second, a third. Within heartbeats, thunderous applause engulfed the auditorium, crashing through each row and VIP seat, echoing off the domed glass ceiling as a belated apology to Eveline. No one remembered the Chanel dresses, Brioni suits, or prestigious titles. Only one simple truth remained. A woman, in a worn sweater, had quietly redefined the limits of human intellect. The applause surged powerfully, resonating throughout the Ascension Forum. Yet Eveline Hart did not beam triumphantly, nor bow to accept the applause as a victor. She stood silently under the lights, clutching her worn notebook to her chest, her faded canvas shoes rooted firmly on the polished wooden stage. Daniel Hart, standing nearby, gave her a proud but unforced nod. He understood this victory belonged to Eveline, and the way she accepted it would always be unique. Eveline slowly stepped up to the podium, her gaze sweeping over the standing ovation. Faces once mocking, now filled with remorse and admiration. She took the microphone, her small hand steady. Her voice rose not loud, not flashy, but clear and warm, a quiet stream flowing through cold stones of human hearts. I didn't come here to prove anything. She paused, her chestnut brown eyes shimmering gently. I came here to support someone I love. A comforting silence settled over the hall. Eveline raised her head, voice stronger. But when asked to provide an answer, I chose not to stay silent. The crystal chandeliers above cast sparkling reflections, like tiny stars falling at her feet. I don't need titles, Eveline said softly, a faint smile on her lips, nor badges, nor polished oak tables. Some audience members bowed their heads, unable to face the unveiled truth. I only need a notebook, a pen, and faith in myself. Eveline gave a slight nod to the crowd, as if bidding farewell to a chapter that was painful but necessary. She stepped down from the stage, her old cardigan swaying gently with each step. Daniel greeted her with a smile brighter than any applause that had come from the audience. As Eveline left the speaker's podium, the applause continued, but this time, it was not merely a recognition of talent. It was respect, it was regret, and it was admiration for a woman who had taught them the most valuable lesson, not just with intellect, but with character. She walked up to Daniel, lifting her gaze to meet his, her eyes shining with quiet joy. "Let's go home," she whispered, a soft smile curving her lips. Daniel nodded and extended his hand. Eveline placed her hand in his warm palm. Amidst the applause still echoing through the hall, the two of them silently walked side by side, leaving behind a place that had once been filled with derision, and leaving a lesson that could never be erased. As Eveline and Daniel stepped out of the Ascension Forum, the tall glass doors closed behind them, slamming shut on a dark chapter of arrogance and prejudice. But inside, the reverberations of the truth Eveline had left behind still echoed, and it quickly led to irreversible consequences. That very afternoon, the Ascension Forum Advisory Board held an emergency meeting. A long list was presented, names of those who had mocked, insulted, or tacitly aided in humiliating Eveline. First on the list was Madeline Rhodes. Not only had she lost her prestigious doctoral scholarship, but she was also indefinitely suspended from her PhD program. All personal funding from research grants was immediately revoked. Her name was removed from the list of speakers at major scientific conferences for the next 3 years. For Madeline, this fall was not just a temporary failure, it was the end of a promising career once painted in gold. Clara Weston, the coordinator, who had subtly assisted, was not spared from the fallout either. The very next morning, a public notice appeared on the school bulletin announcing her transfer to the administrative department. From once standing at the invitation desk, Clara was now relegated to taking minutes for small meetings, her face pale as she walked through the cold hallways. The prestigious professors who had once scoffed at Eveline's worn shoes were no better off. Some lost the chance to review new projects. Some had their funding cut after sponsors who valued honor above all demanded an investigation into their professional ethics. A once refined network built on reputation, connections, and flashy facades began to crack, collapsing like a row of dominoes. The Ascension Forum, once a symbol of arrogant elitism, was now forced to change. The board had to review its speaker invitation criteria, opening doors for real talent, regardless of background, appearance, or status. And at the heart of this change, none other than Eveline Hart. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to shout for fairness. Through action alone, through an unshakable silence, Eveline had rewritten the definition of worth in this world. In the weeks that followed, collaboration invitations from Harvard, MIT, and Stanford poured in. Leading scholars sought to meet and learn from her, but Eveline declined most of them. She wasn't seeking fame. She only wanted a peaceful life, a life where she could continue writing, continue exploring, continue loving, in sun-drenched rooms beside her ever-supportive husband. And the old notebook, its cover scratched and its edges yellowed with time, still followed Eveline like an inseparable part of her, a silent symbol of true intellect, humble, strong, and forever unyielding. Eveline's story was not just a lesson for the arrogant, it was a smoldering flame, reminding the world that true genius doesn't need to flaunt clothes or titles. True genius only needs a blank sheet of paper, a pen, and an unshakable faith in oneself. That fall, the Ascension Forum closed earlier than expected. The sparkling nameplates were taken down. Tailored suits and silk ties disappeared from the old hallways. But the story of Eveline Hart remained, like an indelible mark on the cold marble walls. The following year, when the conference was held again, a noticeable change was seen. No longer were there scornful glances cast at simple clothes. No longer were there mocking laughs when someone brought a worn notebook. On the official program, it was written in modest but sharp lines. Thinking does not reside in appearances. Thinking lives in action. Right under that, in smaller text, in honor of Eveline Hart. Though Eveline never returned, though she declined every invitation, every offer, every delayed glory, she chose to return to the small town where she was born, amidst the sun-drenched fields of Vermont, living a simple life, by the side of the man she loved. There, in a small wooden house, by a window overlooking the ever-changing hillside, Eveline continued to write, not to prove something to the world, not to win awards, but simply because she loved numbers, loved the pure beauty of logic, and the invisible connection of the universe. The old notebook, Each page, stained with ink, continued to grow day by day. No one remembered the names that had once been on the top 10 list of speakers that year. No one spoke of those who had arrogantly waved sapphire name tags like crowns. But somewhere in the hearts of young students, new scientists, and those who had silently witnessed that day, the name Eveline Hart still shone brightly. No need for shouting, no need to walk on the red carpet, no need to have your name mentioned in every news headline. Because true genius doesn't need to stand out to be seen. True genius simply needs a blank page, a pen, and an unshakable belief in what it loves. And so, amidst a world noisy with titles and vanity, the story of the woman in the worn-out cardigan continues to be whispered like a smoldering flame, gentle but eternal. The story of Eveline Hart, the woman with the worn cardigan and old notebook, has come to an end, but the lesson she left behind will forever be etched in our hearts. A brilliance that doesn't need to boast, a strength that doesn't need to show off. With nothing but perseverance and faith in herself, Eveline proved that true genius never needs the world's recognition. If this story has touched your heart, please hit subscribe and leave a like to support us in bringing more inspiring and meaningful stories. Together, let's create a community of those who believe in the power of resilience, intellect, and integrity. Don't forget to share this video to inspire those who need motivation to overcome life's challenges. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next story.